face.
Yeah.
This is part 2 of high performing websites. In part 1, we discussed. Hang on, I'm going to go back.
That's the same thing again.
I didn't swear this time, though, right?
No.
Hold on to it. Part 2, high performing websites, specifically for innovation, accelerators, and communities. We discussed that there were 7 points. James, do you want to recap on what we covered in our first episode?
Yes, sure. One of the key things for us is good digital design techniques, and that's not necessarily a graphic design or a creative design. It's data capture design, so we can capture people's data well. And it's a good structural design because these sites are quite big and there's a lot of propositions happening, and you need to create a good structure so you can move people into the right places so everything's understood, and there's a good user journey that you can then use to leverage to capture data with. So the two key design principles. We talked about site speed being more than just a fast load time. We talked about site speed being interactions that you make if you log in, if you register, if you're waiting for something or submitting data. We talked about how to make that fast and how that's important. And that led us into an enterprise structure where we talked about having the right structure underlying the website. And we spoke about a lot of websites being built with things like WordPress, and they're monolithic and they're competing for resources, and how you have a structure that allows we call it a separation of concerns, where you basically have a various different parts of the site running on different areas, and they don't compete with themselves, and they're more secure and they're faster to load. And then we talked about generative AI search capabilities.
Excellent. Thank you. Moving on then into the next point, James, managing accessibility with a well-governed design system.
Yes. I think design systems are a really key thing for us. I think before we go into accessibility, it's probably best to just have a think about what they are and what they mean and how useful they can be to you. The principle for us is they're about governance and they're about smart operational practices, right? So if you go back a few years, and so a lot of people still work in this way, when you approach website design, you get a designer who kind of opens up a Figma, or used to be Photoshop, any kind of design package, and they say, what am I going to design now? And you almost start with this blank screen mentality. And then when you work with coders, they'll often do the same thing. Okay, I've designed this. Now, how long will it take to code that? And I think if you work in any kind of design and technology-based environment, people will have worked in that environment at some point and seen the amount of inefficiencies that it makes. It makes inefficiencies all the way through the whole process, not just through designing technology. Because if you ask someone what they want to build and then you give them a blank canvas to work on, people will re-architect an app, or people will say, give me Amazon or something similar, somewhere in between something will happen. And that whole process is really, really, really inefficient. And what a design system does is it gives you a series of components, which, if you consider like a login being a component, or you consider when you look at a blog and there's a bunch of cards are a very typical web component. So, you can break down most websites into about 10, I don't know, what do you think, Luke, 10 to 20 components?
Yeah.
And these components are really what's in every single website. And then if you have a design system, what you're able to do is actually have a component that will work in most circumstances, and then you can adapt the component for what you need. And then rather than opening up Photoshop and making a component every time you need one, and then a coder having to type in the code for a component every time you need one, you're actually reusing what you have already, and you're using things that already work and are already tried and are already tested. So that when you come to actually saying, should we use this component, you should use it because you have the data that says it works. And therefore you can just cut through so much unknown stuff, and you can cut through one of the things that always happens in our experience is you might work with a company who've got a board level set of people who are really who want to recreate something, but they don't really understand how to do it, and therefore you'll go round and round in circles and circles and circles trying to meet the thing that they think they're trying to make. Well, actually, you could have made it in probably a week with a bunch of pre-built components, because you're not trying to reinvent everything every time. And so all the way through that cycle of presenting to people, of working out what to do, of working out with the other stakeholders what should happen, to someone designing it, to someone coding it, you save time by implementing a really well-governed design system.
Yeah, I think the thing with the design system is you go through a very robust design process to make these components and the element parts that make up the components. Then that's transferred sort of into code, and you have a sort of a repository for the code and the corresponding designs that are just maintained at all times. And then at that point, it's where it comes into accessibility. You can bake in the accessibility from the start. So you can design stuff that is inherently accessible to the latest design, to the accessibility standards, and then you have the corresponding code that is also to the latest accessibility standards. So you're not just sort of thinking, oh, let's make something, put it out there, and you go, and then after you've launched it, it's sort of like, oh, wait, is that accessible? Let's go back, and then you have to go back to design, and then you have to go back into build, and this and the other. You can bake in accessibility from the very, very beginning, which is really important. There's 16 million, I think, disabled people in the UK of some variants, not including temporary situational impairments as well, people who are injured or whatever. Which means it's very, very important to make sure that your sites are accessible. But more than that, baking it in from the very beginning saves money, really, saves time and money. I think IBM did a study that changing something post-launch can cost up to 100 times more than sorting out at the very beginning. Yeah, because if you think about it, you make something, you launch it, that's the work done. Then you assess it, which takes some time. Then you decide, oh, that's not working. You take it back into design. Then it goes through the whole process of design again, through to build and through to launch. It just costs so much more to do that afterwards, and then that might have sort of a knock-on effect to things around it, and then suddenly the whole thing has spiraled out of control and started to cost quite a lot of money just to get up to standard that it should have been at the very start. So by implementing a good and well-structured and well-governed design system, and baking in the accessibility at the start, one, make sure that your site is accessible, which is very important for reaching all of your customers. But two, it will actually save you money as well.
That's a great explanation. Thank you.
It does. If I can add, not everyone's used to doing it. It takes a bit of a cultural shift. Is something that we've noticed. Like some organisations will adapt better to it than others. I think the key benefits is if you can follow the structure and you can be structured and follow governance, you can then be more predictable because you can do things faster and you know how long things will take because you don't have to create all the code from scratch and you don't have to go through a design process for everything that you do. But actually, a lot of organisations might struggle with that and sometimes treat everything bespokely, and then you fall into a trap of having a design system, but then you kind of change a design system for everything that you do, and that's an interesting dilemma. Try not to, bespokeness is good, and there are always times when you should have things bespoke, and everything should always be on brand. So having a design system doesn't mean it's a templated site. It means there's a component that works in this way, if that makes sense. And I think there's two things there, but it's not necessarily a template. It's not the ability to look like a template, or it won't restrict you so you look like a template. But I think moving teams into using design systems is interesting because you actually say no more sometimes.
There's an argument that it actually enhances things like creativity anyway. Once you got that good solid base sort of there, and then you want to roll something out that's perhaps going to be ever slightly different, because you've got the good solid base, you can actually spend your time and energy on the things that are going to elevate it for this particular need, without just starting with a blank slate again, So you know that the components that you've built and the building blocks of those are good at displaying whatever information it is you need to display. And then if you think, okay, well, we've got this need for something else, a specific landing page that we wanted to do something special here, or animate there, or have a video here, or this, that, and the other, it's fine, because at least you've got this good solid base that actually takes care of 80% of it anyway, and it works. And then the effort can go into this sort of 20% of effort to elevate it to this new need of yours. So really, you build on top of the system as time goes by. So you evolve it, but you evolve it through the needs of a particular thing, and that in a way that's governed by people that means that you're not going to sort of start building it and then take the whole thing down again and build it back up. You're going to sort of just elevate the bits that you've got for the new need that you might have. So a lot of people argue that it stifles things like creativity, but I would argue it does the opposite. By providing a solid base, you can then spend a lot of effort and creative thought, to absolutely sort of augment it and elevate it further.
Yeah, because you should be focusing on user journeys and prototyping and propositions and the visual design, probably, to make a really good brand experience that talks to someone, rather than how do I want my blog card to look, and redesigning a shopping cart. We don't do a lot of e-commerce, but I bet there's been a million shopping carts redesigned, and they all work pretty much 99% the same. So you can see why you don't necessarily want to fall down that route, and it's an easy route for designers to fall down, because designing something like a shopping cart or a login system is quite a straightforward thing, because you're designing user interface elements, whereas actually you really want to be focusing on designing how you're going to get people to the right place, and how you're going to get their data from them once they've trusted you, and all those kind of things, which are way more important.
And you mentioned brand a couple of times there, James, and I imagine from a marketer's point of view, it helps protect all of your brand identity and make sure that it remains consistent and no one sort of twists it around.
It does. It's really useful. It's really useful at a kind of CMO level, because if you've got people who are trying to twist your brand around and you've got a signed off design system and it is well governed, you can just rely on the governance and say, actually, these are the things we're going to use to do this. And they're already designed, they're already coded. And the winning kind of, the home run for that is because you don't have to pay again to recode them. So once you've got your design system in place, rolling out new things with it is much faster and it's much cheaper, because you're not having to recode it again, but it also puts you in that element of control.
Well, if you think about it, it is also the first brand interaction people have. So in a sense, a lot of people think of brand as in colors and type and messaging, and of course that is a big part of it. But in the digital world, actually, the first brand interaction someone often has with you is your site or your app. So the effectiveness of your user interface elements is that first communication. So it sort of is the brand in that sense. And so if you approach it that way from the start, and you say, okay, we need to be communicating in this way, so therefore we should have these elements here, and more than just color and type. You're governing your brand, and so because there's a sort of a tendency with digital design, like I say, to start from scratch all the time. You'd never do that if you were doing brand design. You wouldn't say, okay, we're going to make a new page, let's rethink some of our brand. You'd never do that. It's sort of enshrined, and it's gone through a whole process of, again, that governance, and if you think about your user interface as a core component of your brand communication, and often the first port of call of anyone interfacing with your brand these days, it should be taken as seriously. Any changes to it should be taken as seriously as, we're going to change our brand colors, or we're going to change our brand font. Well, if you're going to change your signed off brand sort of card display, that's just as important, actually, and it's just as big a decision. So it should be taken as seriously as that. Everyone we work with, we create a design system for. I think it's worth looking at that difference between high performing enterprise or corporate websites, and in our innovation accelerator space, they're big sites and they're business critical. So again, if you were doing it for a shop, or a small business, you might not need that level of governance, because you might not change your site that much, or you might be working one-on-one with a web developer who can do that anyway. But if you're working for a large corporate entities, so to speak, these things are really important,
because there's a lot of stakeholders involved, and there's a lot of people with opinions. There's a lot of people whose expectations have to be met, and the governance just really allows you to, once those expectations have been met with the initial set of design systems, you don't really have to change. Like, as Luke said, you shouldn't really be changing them unless there's a real need for it, and then you can really lead into that, and it helps it helps control everything so much.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Should we move on to the next point?
No, I think we should talk about this for 10 more minutes.
I probably do. I'll save that for the next episode.
Right, there we go. Yes. Sorry, that's my fault.
Okay. Moving from responsive to intrinsic design for more efficient code.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So just a bit of background on what these things are. So responsive design generally is where you create what we call breakpoints in the design. So say something looks a certain way on a desktop, and then you start to size down, and then it switches, the design maybe on a tablet, when it's gone portrait to make sure that the content is displayed well, and then you get to say a mobile size, and then the design switches again. So there's sort of key switching points. That's what's sort of responsive design, and that's been around for quite a while, and it does a decent enough job of at least making sure that your site's okay broadly on multiple screen sizes. But we're sort of making a move to a principle called intrinsic design now, and that's ever so slightly different, which is what we do with that. We use sort of instead of having fixed breakpoints, we use sort of fluid measurements. So measurements that instead of saying this is 16 pixels over here, you actually sort of say this is a sort of a percentage of the viewport width over here, actually. And then as your monitor or as your device changes size, everything stays proportionally relative to each other. So instead of using the fixed stuff, we use fluid layouts and with proportional measurements. What that lets us do then is instead of making things necessarily screen centric, you make it more content centric. So we fit the sort of design around the content better. And then we sort of use things like aspect ratios on images. So we used to use sort of fixed image width, so that it'll be 200 pixels wide by 100 pixels deep. Now you sort of aspect ratios, so as something scales down, it proportionally scales down with the screen size. The reason it's really important is, one, when you do responsive design and you have all these various breakpoints, you're essentially creating a lot of extra code for very specific points in time. So there's often a lot of repetition there, and of course increased code is increased speed, increased site size. But the other thing is, you don't really know what the next size of screen is going to be. It used to be, that you'd have an iPhone, an iPad, and a generic laptop size. All right, cool. That's going to take care of 95% of stuff. But actually, there's devices of all manner of sizes now. All manner of tablets, lots and lots of different laptop sizes, lots and lots of different mobile sizes. So this whole idea of switching all of a sudden for one point doesn't necessarily catch everything. So whilst we will still use breakpoints, because there are design shifts, certainly in sort of when you go from, say, a landscape laptop into a sort of a portrait iPad or tablet or phone, and therefore there has to be, in that point, quite a dramatic shift in how we lay stuff out. Actually, the rest of it we need to sort of scale proportionally. So even as you scale if you go from a standard laptop, say, onto a 4K HD screen, actually everything should proportionally look the same there in that viewport. And so intrinsic design is that sort of approach. So it will future-proof, but also be more efficient as well.
I have a question. How does that work with cross-browser testing?
Cross-browser testing?
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, all modern browsers can deal with these units, and so it should work consistently across modern browsers. Obviously, if you start to go back to and there are sometimes requirements to go back to older browsers like Internet Explorer 11 and less, depending on the organization, their needs, then obviously you have to look at that a bit more specifically. But that's the case anyway when you have to go back to those browsers, because it's a very specific requirement at that point.
Yeah.
But modern browsers should take care of all of that.
Excellent. Any other points on that? It felt like that was actually pretty conclusive.
Yes. Like I say,
sustainability isn't this a good move to, if you're thinking about coding in a sustainable way, which we all should be. Like, designing for sustainability is really important because
it does enhance speed, obviously, because site load is less, and you're right, it does enhance sustainability. One of the major points of sustainability is less throughput of data. The less you have to send, the more sustainable it is. The less electricity it uses to process it, the less bandwidth it uses. So any kind of code reduction, is always going to help for sustainability, and so this is a double whammy, really. It makes it display better, but it also makes it less throughput, so therefore more sustainable and faster.
We found this interesting thing because everyone wants a fast website for performance. They want it to be fast for Google page speed test, so Google bumps them up the algorithm. But the massive upshot of that is it's more sustainable too, because you've got less code and less data. So I think there's a magic thing happening there where you can get all those things right, and you've got a much faster website, and it's much more environmentally friendly too, as long as you're hosting in the right places.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
No problem.
So on to point number 7 then, so the last one. Creating a fast editing experience for your team, by which we're talking about the CMS.
Yeah, I think this is important because obviously the CMSs come in all shapes and sizes. Do you know what I mean? And some are easier to use than others. But one thing that we think is very important is when you are piecing together any kind of content management, is to actually work with the team that's using it to understand their workflows. So a lot of CMSs or ways that CMSs are implemented will either allow not very much customization, which is no good for anyone, or too much. And the too much is actually quite a problem because whilst you can do anything, it's quite overwhelming. It takes a long time to get things exactly how you want them. So this actually goes hand in hand with the design system. When we make these design systems, we and with intrinsic design actually, So when we make the design system and we use intrinsic design, you've made something that's as flexible as it needs to be, that's going to work in various screen sizes without having to specifically tell it, oh, please do this now, So with all those things going hand in hand, you create blocks in your CMS that have just the right amount of customization that the team needs, without them having to go in and be too granular with setting, when it's on mobile, can we do this now, please, and things like that, because that actually gets taken care of as part of this well-governed design system and taken care of with the intrinsic design approach, which leaves your team with a sort of a CMS block that does exactly what they need it to do and has the configurations that they need from it. But this then goes back to working with your teams to understand really what they need and the workflows of different people that are using the site. So you might have, say, a marketing team that has a need for much more customizability as they're making landing pages and wants some of that sort of creative, be able to sort of have some creative output there. Or you might have, say, an events team who just need to get their event up, boom, 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 done. So you need to have a look at the workflows and the needs of those teams and customize that CMS experience for them, right down to things like publishing workflows. Does this need to be reviewed by someone, here before it can be put out? So what we find is important is to really work with your teams to understand their workflows and the needs of the sort of the components that are going in the site, so that we can make them as efficient for the needs of those particular teams.
One thing we found as well is everyone wants flexibility, but in reality, when you look at people's websites, there's a thing called patterns, which is the content on the page and the way it's laid out. And there are probably only 5 or 6 patterns you ever need in a site to do most things. But again, going back to the open page kind of problem, which is you say to someone, here's a content management system, make what you like. all of a sudden you're paralyzed because you don't know what to do. Whereas you can set them up with pre-built patterns, so you can say, here is a listing, a product listing. Check the project listing, and it's already got the details filled out for you, so you can fill out your own product details. You don't really have to think about what to put on those things. What we have seen is when people do have to think about those things, people can make quite random decisions, which then can actually detract from the things like the data collection points or the user experience bit. Because instead of putting a link to a form where you capture someone's details, people will put email addresses up, and then the people will leave the company. Then you've got a load of email addresses left in your site collecting leads for you that don't exist anymore. So there's loads of reasons why good patterns can help.
Well, it helps bridge that what they call the imagination gap as well. Giving someone a blank slate and saying, "Go on, make a landing page." Do you know what I mean? That's quite an undertaking, actually. Whereas, again, tying it back into the design system as well, where we do end up outputting sort of suggested layouts for things, and then transferring that into systems where we're able to just bring down suggested layout A. That gets the user 90% there, do you know what I mean, with a structure that we know is going to work for them, and then they can focus their creativity on making the little edits to the particular need of that landing page. Whereas making a system, yes, that can do everything and anything, great, but then it's going to take people a lot of time, and a lot of energy, and then probably deviate again from these core components anyway. So having enough flexibility to get what you need, but getting someone 90% of the way there at the start anyway saves marketing teams time, gets an effective page up, but allows them to sort of flex their creativity as well.
So just to check that I've understood that correctly. So currently, if I went into a company website and I had a page that I wanted to build, quite often in my experience, what you end up doing is you've got in effect a blank page, but there are components there that someone's created, but you're almost modeling it on an existing page. So you're picking up this component and then that one, and I need to add that one in there, and I need to then rearrange my boxes because they're not quite in the right place. Yeah. Rather than that, actually, I could just go straight to, here's my template for my product page, and I just fill it in, rather than having to actually almost build that page, even though I'm sort of using drop-in components.
And it can be, so it can be like pre-made, fully pre-made sort of pattern for a full page, so that gets you all the way there. Or you can take certain chunks of it, so you might have patterns for certain types of content. So and therefore you might decide, actually I don't want one of these pre-made ones, fully pre-made ones, but actually I like content block A and content block C and content block D. So I'll go boom boom boom. And so they're almost like collections of these components that have been put together already in a meaningful way that we know works. So you can either go all in and say, right, let's just get landing page A up, change the image, put some text in, and off we go. Or actually, I'd like to rework this one slightly. Maybe you're A/B testing or something, So actually, I'd like hero A, and then we'll have content block D and F, But rather than going in at the granular level and having to say, okay, well, let's put some cards next to here, and that will sort of take care of that. There's varying levels of those sort of predefined blocks of content.
I'm also right in thinking, just kind of a very small example here, but if you had intrinsic design and your fast editing experience together, it's a very small example. For instance, I would only need to upload one photo rather than having to upload 3 different sizes, for instance, to fit different breakpoints. All of that would be dealt with, and so that speeds up that process too.
Yeah, exactly. And like I say, you wouldn't have to define how you want it on mobile, because the system's been built, to deal with that intrinsically. Yeah.
Sounds lovely. Can I have one?
It does need time and effort to do. I think in our experience, it's quite easy to make content management systems that don't need to be updated very often, and therefore they can look quite technical in the background, and then they can grow into things. They can turn into like Frankenstein's monsters, because you bolt something on here, you add something on here, and then someone wants to add a listing onto a page, and then all of a sudden the page is edited in 3 different places. And I think trying to avoid that has to be a deliberate choice. and you have to set out and say, I want to make a good editing experience. Because I think unless
work up front, if you get the work up front, and yes, it is more of an investment up front, but it's not just the hours you save in sort of design and build time moving forward, the hours you save in your team's usage of the site. Yeah, if you can get your team down to the place where they're using it, getting a landing page, meaningful landing page up that works, in an hour rather than 4, then you're saving time in your internal teams as well. So it is faster to design and build on top of as we move forward, but it's also you save a lot of hours of your team's time as well.
Not to mention sanity.
And sanity, yeah. Let's face it. I mean, an ideal content management system, you would just think about it and it would appear. Yeah. So as little, that's the sort of our point. As little tinkering, as little, input as you need to get something out that's how you want it. That's always the goal. Yeah, because no one really wants to be using content management systems. Really, that's not. No, your marketing team didn't get into marketing so that they could use content management systems. They did it because they wanted to run marketing campaigns. And there obviously there's always going to be some input in a CMS at some point. But if we can get that, if we can make that a much more streamlined process, then it sort of gets that and lets the marketing teams get on with what they're actually supposed to be doing, which is not really using CMSs. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. I think that's all of our 7 points covered in part 1 and part 2.
Yay! Boom. There we go.
I wasn't recording.
Oh, you better have.